So I just want to begin with a question, and you don't have to raise your hand or answer out loud or anything, but truthfully, do you ever find yourself just not quite as spiritual as you think you should be? You know, just on the inside, just not quite as quick to pray or not quite as quick to trust God, or, you know, just honestly kind of when you reflect on your own spiritual life and where you are, do you ever just go, I'm not sure if I am where I should be? Or maybe it's by comparison. Maybe you see somebody else and you think, man, they are so excited about God, or they are so into something. Or maybe it's even in a worship service and you're sitting there watching folks sing and you're singing along and you see somebody on stage and they're so into it and excited. And have you ever just like internally gone, I just don't get that excited. I'm just not sure if I am getting this. You know, I want to get it, but I'm not sure if I'm getting it. Again, you don't have to raise your hand, but I'm just wondering, have you ever felt that way? Have you ever come to a place in your spiritual life where you just wonder, you know, I just don't know right now. I'm just not sure about exactly what I'm feeling. And I'm personally, I'll just be the first to confess, I have a tendency, me personally, just the internal, you might not ever notice it on the outside, but internally, I have a tendency to have some ups and some downs, you know, some moments that are really, really highly positive, and there are moments when I think that I could never distrust God for anything, like I'm going to be totally courageous in faith and totally, you know, forward focused and totally believing about everything. And then there are other moments, you know, when I catch myself right on the end of something that's worn me out or something that's in some way, you know, kind of blown me up inside. There are those moments when I just go, I don't know if I'll ever have that much faith again. You know, that makes sense? That's just the honest, real truth, is that spiritual life inside, I think sometimes goes to big heights and sometimes goes to big lows. And then sometimes you even have seasons of life where even though you might have highs and lows in that season, as a whole, that season is a high, you know? Or you might have other seasons of life where even though you have some highs and lows in the season, that season as in its entirety is kind of a low, you know? It's kind of a low. About 2007, I started a season that was low, a season that was a lower season. It was not, it wasn't a good couple of years. It just, you know, I just had some things in my personal life and in my friendships and in my relationships with people that I served with at church, and some things happened at the church that I was pastoring, and it was just just kind of as a whole, like average got dropped down a little bit. What was normal was a little bit lower, and I caught myself being a little bit more grumpy than I might normally be. And I'm not talking about for a day or two. I'm talking about, say, a year and a half, you know, like an extended period of time. Like I caught myself being a little bit quicker to doubt God, a little bit quicker to be frustrated with him. And so I came to a place in the middle of 2008 where I had to make a decision about, I don't want to spend the rest of my spiritual life in this low. I don't want to do it. Like I was, on the outside, I was still being faithful. I was still preaching sermons and pastoring a church and leading people. I probably led 20 or 30 people to Christ during that year and a half of me feeling kind of personally down. If you had known me, if you weren't real close to me, you might not have known that anything was different. But on the inside, I was just kind of struggling. And so I even went to my doctor and I said, my blood pressure's up and I don't know what's wrong with me. Something's not right. And my doctor told me this. My medical doctor, who's not a Christian, who is a spiritual man, but I don't believe that he's a Christian. He and I have had a lot of heart-to-heart conversations about faith, and he just looked at me and he said, you need to change careers. Has your doctor ever told you that before? You know, you need to change careers. And I said, well, that's not going to happen, doc. And he said, well, then you need to take some pills. And I went, I really don't want to do that either. You know, I really don't want, is there anything else? And he said, well, then you're going to have to make some major changes in your life, or you're just going to fizzle. You know, it's not going to get better. And so in my prayer time with those I was, you know, kind of following and listening to, and with his advice and stuff, some things really kind of hit me hard. And so in 2008 and 2009, and then especially in 2010, I started kind of changing the way I lived. Everything from what I ate to how much I slept, you know, to whether or not I would worry about certain things. I started changing the number of friends that I had. I tried to find stronger relationships with a fewer number of people, you know, where in the long run I had a stronger, tighter, more real friendships with a smaller group versus trying to be everybody's best friend, which was killing me, right? And so in the long run, I found that 2008, 2009, 2010, those were highs. Those are really highs. Like, even though there were lows and highs in them, as a whole, you look at them and there were some highs. So I'm sharing this with you, and I'm going to share some more, but I want to tell you one of the things that God started doing with me, and that was that occasionally, just once or twice a year, occasionally, I started taking retreat, personal retreat. Like, I'm going to get away from everybody who needs anything from me, and I'm going to try just on my own to walk with God better than I have been walking with God. I'm going to try to feel Him, sense Him, connect with Him, know Him better than I have before. And I'm sharing this with you as a story because I want you to know that this is a reality that all Christians ultimately are going to need in their life. In fact, we'll take it a step up from that. This is a reality that Jesus Himself needed in His life. Have you noticed this when you read the scriptures, how often Jesus gets off away from the disciples? He never says, I'm sick of you boys. I have got to go smell some green grass without one of you around. He never says it that way, but that's the kind of emotion driving this desire for Him to get off on His own. And what always happened is that He would get off on His own, and when He came back from being off on His own, something big would happen. Like, He would come back from being off on His own and feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He would come back from being off on His own, and He would walk on the water and get Simon Peter to walk on the water with Him. You see what I'm saying? He would come back from being off on His own and face Satan in the temptations and come out victorious. So I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand some things about faith and ultimately tell you that I have been, over the past week, in one of those moments where I was kind of off, for the most part, by myself with a good friend and with some friends that I don't see very often, but went off out of this area, kind of went on a personal retreat and at a leadership conference in Orlando. And we went from 6:30 in the morning until 1 a.m. every day, just studying and praising and listening and learning and having some fun mixed in all of that. And in the process, I kind of come back with an energized spirit, with an excited and focused spirit. And while gone, this is awesome. It's like for 10 weeks we've been together now, and I've been praying for somebody to meet Jesus and kind of bummed out and down when they don't and that kind of thing. And while I'm out of town, 2 young children give their lives to Christ at Awana this past Wednesday night. That's exciting. That's exciting. And listen, and so I come back with this just strong desire for that not to be the abnormal thing that occasionally happens that we might once in a while clap for, but that kind of thing becomes the absolute normal that we expect on a regular basis in a week as a part of this church, is that people's lives will regularly be affected, and it will be normal for things like redemption to happen, and it will be normal for us to be baptizing new believers, and it will be normal for us to be celebrating life change. Does that make sense? And so here's the deal, in just coming from my own life, is I want you to know that if life change is going to be normal in us as a church, then I want life change to be normal in me. And I want life change to be normal in our other leaders. I want life change that God, it's not just something, I got saved 30 years ago and I've been walking with God ever since then. That's great, but that's not the kind of vibrant, dynamic, real life relationship that we can have with Christ, who can change your life again today. Does it make sense? And so what I'm going to do is, just for fun, I'm going to take you to that conference with me for just a moment, and then come out of that kind of telling you some things that God did in my life while I was there. So let me give you some examples. We went to a conference. I took Benji Gwill with me. We originally had 2 tickets for Stephanie and I, and she was unable to go. And so I started looking around and thought, who would I not get sick of in a car for 27 hours? You think I'm kidding, but ask that kind of question. You're going to spend 27 hours in a car with somebody. You start wondering, who can I handle? And anyway, I love Benji and had a great time with him. The first slide that you'll see is just kind of when we first walked in and sat down. This is First Baptist Church of Orlando, but really it's not kind of a First Baptist Church kind of event. Okay, we utilize that building. It's perfect in the great location, and the staff there are good to us as an organization. But The organization I'm a part of is Exponential. It's a group of 5,000 church planters that meet once a year to hear God's word from some of our best teachers and to pray together and worship together. And out of 5,000, every year there'll be about 1,000 new people who are coming to get ready to plant a church that year. And I don't know if you know many church planters, but church planters are weird people. They are people who, like foreign missionaries in a lot of ways, their faith is very much wrapped up in the mission that God has sent them on. And church planters as a whole are the kind of people who are willing to completely drop everything to go do what they think God has told them to do. And so what you have in this place are people who live in Oregon, but they're about to move to the Sudan, and they go plant a church. Or people who live in inner city, New York City, where nobody wants a church at all, and they're about to start a church in a local coffee shop and share the gospel with their friends. And so you've got these people who are very, very courageous on the outside, like lots of boldness and power and strength, but on the inside as a whole, church planters, I'll just make my own confession, is that we are stinking scared to death, okay? Like relying completely and totally on what God has told us to do and the promises that he's made to us. And so it's like life is now, okay, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to step, and I don't know what's out there, but I'm going to do it. And so what ends up happening is that you have a group of people who many times feel very alone. They feel very on their own. For the most part, most of them do not have a church family. They're going into a community of lost people, and they're going to go make a church family over the next 10 years or 20 years or whatever. And so they're entrepreneurial, they're gutsy, and that blend of gutsy and scared to death creates a situation where faith is absolutely required. You see what I'm saying? You don't get to do that if you don't have great faith. So, and I don't say this about myself, I say this about the young men and leaders who I met there, but these are the special forces of pastors. You know what I mean? Like these are the Army Rangers. These are the ones who are going in to do some pretty amazing things. And I love being around them because being around them makes me more filled with faith. Being around them gets me excited and makes me want to, chase into hell with a water pistol. I mean, it's just like really, really gets me lifted up. And so while I was there, though, I learned some things. I learned how to use, finally, for the first time ever, next slide, learned how to use the whatever they call that cool thing on the iPhone where you can take the picture that's really, really broad and wide, the panoramic thing. That's what the stage looked like sitting back in the back. Les is going, yes, isn't panoramic view photography cool? It really is. It does make it kind of look rounded in the middle, but that was one of the things that happened. And then the next thing, you can go to the next slide. We had great worship leadership while we were there. I don't know if this was coincidental by the power of God or if it was planned just last minute, but the band that leads worship every year, they're a band from a church that's been planted in the last year. It's one of the things we want to do. And so what we don't do is go out and like get the biggest and the best and the most well-known David Crowder band come in to lead worship. We don't do that. We honor a worship team from a church that just started, and this church just started in inner city Boston. And so on last week, the church experienced the bombing. Their ministry teams went into action, serving and caring for folks, and toward the end of the week, their worship team loaded up their stuff and drove to Florida, where they led us in worship. And there was just a sense of connection to God that was amazing. What you'll see in this photo is just church planters of all ages and nationalities and backgrounds. I felt kind of odd in the middle of a worship service, but I was so overwhelmed by what was happening. I wanted to stick my iPhone in the air and start taking pictures of stuff just to be able to record and share. I was standing at this point in the front row, or second row, I guess it was. The guy whose ear you see so clearly, his name is Eddie. He's a church planter in Nashville that I love and have been friends with and have coached. He's somebody I'm helping coach. I don't know the other men other than this is just a time of worshiping with them, and it was a beautiful, beautiful thing. The next slide that you'll see was a shot of the stage that day, and this photograph was taken on Thursday. On Wednesday, something had happened to me that I'm going to tell you about in a moment, but on Wednesday, something had happened to me where I just felt so renewed and so refreshed and so positively overwhelmed that I was drawn into worship more so than normal. I mean, I just felt connected to God and worshiped God in a more pure and beautiful way, and it had not happened in my life in quite some time up until this moment. So while there, I had a chance to be taught by some pretty great leaders. This is Francis Chan. He sat 2 seats from me. For those of you who are, if you're a country music fan, that's like getting to sit next to Toby Keith. You know what I mean? Like that's like if you're a rock and roll fan, this is like getting to sit beside Adam Levine. I mean, this was for a young church planter, pastor. I felt so overwhelmed by the opportunity to sit beside this guy. I want to tell you a little bit of his story, just so you know the kinds of people that motivate me. Francis Chan pastored Cornerstone Church in Simi Valley, California, and in the early, I guess it would be the late 90s, they had grown like crazy, and they kept growing, and they started a building fund to build a facility. And people gave, over a 2-year period, they gave $10 million, okay? $10 million to build a new facility. It was early 2001, 2002, something like that, and Francis Chan woke up in the middle of the night, pastor of this 5,000 or 6,000 person church. They're meeting in a school, okay? They're reaching lost people like crazy. He wakes up in the middle of the night, and he senses that God has clearly told him, do not build that building. Now, just think about this. For 2 years, they've been working toward this. They've raised $10 million. It's the day before, the next Sunday morning, he is supposed to stand up at the school in front of 5,000 people and say, we've raised enough money, we're going to build the building. Like, that's what they've been working for to this point. And God tells him, God says, do not build that building. He spends the rest of the night wide awake, praying, crying, worried. He calls all of his elder leaders and says, we have to have breakfast at 5 o'clock on Sunday morning. I've got to tell you something. He calls them all together. He looks at his wife, he holds her tight, and he says, honey, I'm going to be fired today. I need you to understand. I'm going to lose my job because I'm going to go and tell them that I can't lead them to build this building. And so he goes and sits down at a pancake house or waffle house, something that was open that early, sits down with 7 or 8 other men who are his leaders and elders there, and he goes, guys, I just don't know how to tell you this. He starts weeping. He says, I feel like God's impressing upon me to do something. I just want you to know, I don't think we can build this building. And I know that you guys are all committed to it. And I know that you're probably going to ask for my resignation. And I know that you're going to be very angry with me and upset with me. But I just don't know what to do other than tell you that I can't build the building. And one of his other elders went, whew, oh gosh, that is great news. I spent all night long last night praying, and I think God told me the same thing. And another one started sharing, and another one started sharing. And so they didn't know what to tell the church. And so that next morning, they all stood together, and they said, guys, we don't know what to tell you, but God is telling us to do something different. We're not supposed to build the building. And the whole crowd went, oh, like I've been giving for this and serving for this and praying for this and caring for this right up to this moment. What are we going to do? The story ends a few months later when what they ended up doing was taking the $10 million they had raised to build the facility, and they spent about $5 million on a facility, and they built a building. They just built it a little smaller, a little more eco-friendly, and they took $5 million to countries in Africa, and they built hospitals, and they built nurseries or refugee places for children without parents. They built places to care for kids. They built schools where they could educate children who weren't being cared for. And for $5 million, they had major effect on an entire country because of the fact that one leader was willing to hear God and stand up and say, I won't do what God told me not to do. See what I'm saying? That's why I get excited about sitting beside him, because I'm like, this guy is for real. I love this guy. There were other leaders there that kind of spoke to my heart. You can keep going through. The next one is Craig Groeschel. You all know that's a guy that I regularly listen to, and I hear sermons from him nearly every week online. Young lady named Jo, fantastic sermon that she gave, kind of teaching us about men and women working together. I was impressed with. And then the next thing that I saw was this guy. There's a little Asian guy. It's the next slide. This little Asian guy was on stage the whole time anybody was teaching, and he had this ink board. And you guys know I'm digging the ink board. Like I really, really like the whiteboard. And while anybody was teaching, he's just taking notes. And he's just taking all kinds of crazy notes, and he's got the best handwriting on the planet, right? And he's doing all these drawing lines between their thoughts, and so he's basically writing a mind map for every message that's shared. And at the end, everybody, all these little church planners like myself, we're walking up and we're taking pictures of the board because we want to make sure and get all those notes from what the guy just had to say. So that was pretty much my week down there, hanging out with people who care about me and love me, and they were praying for me. I had an opportunity to pray with them. Lots of worship, lots of great teachings. But there was one kind of out of the masses of it that was pretty overwhelming for me. And I'm not going to give you the points of the message because one of these days it was that good, I just might steal it and use it. But Craig Rochelle, pastor of Life Church in Oklahoma City, talked about motivation for leaders, things on the inside that motivate leaders. And it wasn't necessarily bad things versus good things. It was just limited things versus unlimited things. And so ultimately I saw that a lot of the pain and struggle that I faced in life did not come from God and did not come from something I had to face, but in a lot of ways, a lot of it came from me. My own motivations, my own desires, my own stuff that needed to be recognized. And so I found myself at the end of one of the worship services. There was no altar call. There was nobody else down front. There was nothing. But I just kind of found myself down there. And I went down to just pray and things. And before you know it, I was on my knees. And before you know it, I was on my all fours. And I don't know what happened so much as I just felt like I was telling God about how I felt and my fears and all that stuff. And it just, I don't know, it just felt like a weight that was there went away. And I started crying. I'm not the kind of guy that's willing. I don't like crying. I don't think it's cool. I don't enjoy it at all. I would prefer to never cry again. This is not my kind of thing. I only cry like when something's really sad or I throw up. That's pretty much the only two times I ever cry. I really don't have any desire to whimper and snot and all that stuff. I don't want to do that. I don't. But I found myself just kind of broken there. And before you know it, I must have been quite the spectacle because I was the only 5,000 people in a room. I was the only person at the altar. And all of a sudden, the guy sitting in the front row who I've never met before came and laid hands on me and prayed for me. And have you ever cried in such a way that your whole body's like shaking, like you feel like you're like I don't know how to describe it, but it was not pretty. And I just was broken. And then somebody else laid their hands on me, and then somebody else laid their hands on me, and I don't even know who most of those people were. And anyway, 3/4 of the way or so through this, I sat up and I breathed in, and it was like I breathed in pure oxygen. It was like I breathed in something cold, and it was a good kind of like a cleansing, kind of refreshing thing. And I didn't feel it just in my lungs, but all through me. And it just, I don't know, it was just a refreshing, cathartic, cleansing kind of moment for me. And so I stood up and I spent the rest of the day just enjoying all that was going on and thinking about life and here at the Potter's House and all that God's doing with us. And I just want to bring you a very short, very, very short, and like 10 minutes and I'll be done, message about being a disciple of Christ. I know one of my primary flaws over time is that I've made converts instead of making disciples, in the sense that I've shared enough of the gospel for someone to say, yes, I want to go to heaven, but not enough of the gospel for somebody to say, yes, I want to follow Jesus with every ounce of my being for the rest of my life. There's a difference. There's a huge difference. And we ought to be about disciple making and not about convert making. It's a big difference. But as I looked at disciples over this week, just studying disciples, I see some weird things about disciples. For instance, the disciples of Jesus, they abandon and desert him at times. They argue with one another. Disciples become terrified, scared to death, and worried. The disciples wonder. In other words, they don't have all the answers. The disciples find themselves with more question marks than answers about what Jesus is doing. The disciples fail. They fail. Do you know that story when Jesus sends them out to go do something great and somebody brings them a man who's sick and he's got a demonic possession and they say, hey, you're the disciples of Jesus. Pray for him. Heal him. Do something. And the disciples pray and they do everything they've seen Jesus do, and they're so excited and they're so faith-filled and they're so trusting, and it doesn't work. And the story ends with the guy going to Jesus going, look, I thought I could go to your disciples and maybe it would work, but they don't know what they're doing. So could you pray with this guy? They just fail. Can you imagine what it felt like to be a disciple then going, failed again, The disciples, they lose their temper. The biblical word is indignant. Like they get angry with a passion, like focused. They want to make something change, but they can't make it change, so they're just mad about it. You ever been there? These are all the failures, the weak side of the disciples. And I don't know about you, but when I see those things exist in my life, I get so disappointed in myself and I get so frustrated with myself, wondering why in the world I'm not over that yet. You know, like, I've been a Christian 30 years. Why am I not over having a temper? Why am I not over having so many questions? Why am I not over being terrified? Why am I not over arguing with somebody that I shouldn't be arguing? Why have I not gotten over that yet? Right? Have you ever asked yourself those questions? Like, why am I not further along than I am? And I think that's a great question to ask. It's a good question for us to ask. Let me tell you a few other good things that we see in disciples. The first thing is that disciples love one another. Over and over, we see examples of them expressing their love to one another. John 13:35 says, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. So in other words, disciples aren't perfect. Disciples mess up and fall flat and do dumb things. Disciples, make mistakes and are embarrassed. Disciples do all that. But disciples, if you're really a disciple, disciples do all of that in the confines of relationships with people who love them and want them to follow Christ and do better. So when a disciple sees another disciple fail, the first disciple handles the second disciple's failure with love. Right? See, there are a lot of people who they think they're a disciple and they see another disciple fail and they handle the other disciple's failure with judgment. That's not a disciple. That's not the way a disciple handles it. A disciple handles another disciple's failure with love. We love one another. That's the way it works. I mean, that's ultimately the way it works. So here's what I'm getting at. Just talking about me, and I'm not talking about me, Brad, the pastor. I'm just saying me as a guy who goes to church here. I need to live life and know that when I fail, which I will, guaranteed going to happen when I fail, that my family of fellow disciples are going to handle my failure with love. That changes the world right there for me. That changes everything for me about whether or not life is even possible. Right? Spiritual life is possible. So we live life knowing that in our struggling and striving to do right and to follow God, that in the midst of our failures, when we do, we're surrounded by people who love us. Do you know that the majority of the world does not have that? Doesn't have it at all. That's the first thing that we know about disciples. Another thing that we know about disciples is that disciples obey. Now, I've already told you they fail, so they don't always obey. But as a whole, their life is described by obedience. Disciples are obedient people. It says in Matthew 21:6 that the two disciples did as Jesus commanded. Now, that's a short little sweet verse. The background is Jesus has just given them ridiculous guidance to go into town on the Sabbath, find a donkey, talk to the guy that's got the donkey, get the donkey, put the stuff in the room. All things they don't understand, all things they don't understand why he would want them to do. And yet it says that when the master said do it, they did it. There are going to be times in your life and mine, like in Francis Chan's life, where God gives us guidance that doesn't make sense. Guidance that seems to be completely the wrong thing. But when we share it with other believers, like he did, when we find ourselves encouraged by other believers, then we'll find ourselves in the middle of obedience in a great way. That's a beautiful thing. The last thing is that disciples carry crosses. Disciples carry crosses, and this is probably the most important thing I'm going to say. Luke 14:27, Jesus says, if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my, what's the word? Disciple. You can't. You can't be my disciple. You can't. So what in the world is carrying a cross? I mean, I get the literal. Jesus carried his cross to Golgotha, dies on the cross, dies for our sins. I get the literal, but the figurative, it's 2,000 years later. He's talking to Brad Henson, and he's saying, if you don't carry your cross, you can't be my disciple. What in the world does that mean? You ever ask yourself that question? You see, I told you, disciples have questions, sometimes more than answers. That's an intimidating question. Jesus just said, if you don't get this right, you can't follow me. If you don't do this, you can't follow me. And it makes me want to go, well, what is it? Carry your cross. What do I do to carry my cross? That's a real question, I think, that we have to wonder. It's not just some figurative thing. It's not just, well, I go to church. I get it. Sometimes going to church feels like carrying a cross. I know that. But I don't think that's what he's talking about, okay? I got a Bible. I read it every now and then. It's not carrying a cross, okay? You know? I got a TV. I accidentally every now and then watch Oprah. Okay, that doesn't make me an Oprah follower. You know, like, Lord, no. You know what I'm saying? So that's not it. What is it? I got to carry my cross. Here's the things I can tell you from my own personal life, and I'm done, is that carrying a cross is painful. It's not exciting. Carrying a cross is not something everybody's volunteering for. Carrying a cross is not, it's painful, okay? There are 3 particular pains that I'm just going to toss at you that's from my life. Now, this may not fit everybody, but this is an honest confession of my walk with God. I hope that you hear it that way. This is just from me. These are 3 pains I feel. 1, knowing that I have been successful with temptations most of the time. Knowing that I, as a human being, have been successful with temptations most of the time. The honest truth is, the pain of carrying my cross is that I remember my failing or my falling down more than I remember my standing up. It's the honest truth. You want to talk to me about sin and things? Even though I know for a fact that I have won most of the time, I catch myself feeling or remembering, thinking about the falling downs more often. The second, carrying a cross pain, is that knowing that I've been loving to my Christian family most of the time. I feel the pain of broken relationships more than sometimes I enjoy the beauty of the healthy ones. Now listen, the thing about carrying a cross. The thing about carrying a cross is that everything I'm describing right now is not healthy. I'm not saying everybody should do this. Don't hear me that. I'm saying that walking with God and journeying through this world with the body of flesh and the struggle that comes with all of that and the Spirit of Christ and the joy that comes with all of that, there is this, as Romans 7 says, this war, this battle that goes on with us. If you don't have the war, you don't have the battle, then you're not carrying the cross. Carrying the cross is about moving forward in spite of the pain, moving forward in spite of the struggle, moving forward in spite of the brokenness, so that instead of thinking about how you feel right now I feel like I have a cross on my shoulder right now, instead of focusing all your attention on right now, carrying the cross means that you keep moving forward in spite of it. The third struggle that I catch myself with is that knowing that I have been courageous in obedience and successful by most everyone's standards, sometimes I feel my failures more than my successes on a daily basis. It's the honest truth. I tell you these things just as a personal confession because I want you to know that there are a lot of different ways people deal with the kind of stuff I'm talking about. There are a lot of different ways. Some people have this ability to just forget about it, put it out of their mind and not deal with it. I'm not sure they're carrying a cross. I don't know. Others stop carrying the cross and just wilt under its weight. And so whether it be guilt or shame or failure or whatever, instead of carrying a cross, they just stop. They just stop and it wins. And in the process of it winning, their faith doesn't move them forward. Jesus says, if you're not willing to carry your cross, you can't be my disciple. That's what he says. It's a very haunting passage for me. And so the truth is this, that as we walk with God and follow God and love God and trust God and want to do everything God wants us to do in this world and with this life, as we occasionally find those lower moments or those valley bottoms where we go, man, I feel like a failure. Man, I sense that I'm broken. Man, I wish I could do something differently. Man, I struggle in this area or that way. It's in those moments that the way to the mountaintop is carrying the cross. Now, what's in your mindset? What's in your heart when you carry that cross, when you go, this hurts. I don't like that part. I don't like that memory. I wish I could get away with that, is this. And this is why I've been talking about the gospel so much over the past few weeks, is this. I am not who I used to be, but I am who Jesus says I am. I am not what I've done or what I've achieved or not achieved. But I am what Christ has done and has achieved and will achieve. I'm not the sum of my mistakes and falling shorts, but I am the sum of God's victory through Christ. And so I can step forward, move forward, take the next step in life, carry this cross, because I know that ahead of me and ahead of you, if you are carrying a cross, ahead of me is the Jesus that I'm following, the Jesus that I'm becoming like, the Jesus that I want to know for eternity, the Jesus who not only forgave my sin when I was 8, when I gave my life to Christ and then was baptized afterwards, not only that, but each and every day of life now, as struggle moves me forward, as I feel the pain of loss and the success of victory, it's Christ who keeps me walking with that cross, holding it, carrying it, following him. And ultimately, it's moving forward through that struggle that grows you. It's moving forward through that pain that makes you more like him. It's moving forward through that difficult moment that God uses to filter us into looking more and more like Christ in our life. To answer my first question and be done, why do I keep struggling with that? Why can't I get over that? Why haven't I tackled that or conquered that yet? Is that if I conquered it or tackled it or got rid of it, if it didn't exist in my life or yours, then there would be nothing else to filter me to be anything more like Christ than I am now. It's carrying the cross and moving forward that makes us more like Jesus. Let's pray together.